When Plotz writes about the Israelites' 40-year trek through the desert, he notes that the Israelites never stop their whining, and God in turn never stops the punishments. In the book of Numbers, chapter 21, verses 4 through 6, the Israelites are complaining about having to have left Egypt. Even though they were slaves there, they're still actually better off because at least they had plenty to drink and they had a varied diet instead of having to eat this cursed manna 3 times a day. And God gets so fed up with their ungratefulness and kvetching that he kills a number of them by unleashing a plague of vipers. And Plotz comments, "I'm pretty impressed by the variety of God's afflictions. So far, the Lord has inflicted on the wandering Israelites skin diseases, food poisoning, sundry plagues, several fires, an earthquake, and now snakes. It's like a Saw movie." When Plotz gets to summarizing chapter 25 of the book of Numbers, he writes, "The Lord has made it abundantly clear that he dislikes sexual misbehavior, loathes intermarriage, and despises idolatry. What happens when you combine all 3 of his favorite sins? Gentle chiding? Sweet persuasion? I don't think so. Let's watch." Plotz also writes that reading the Bible has made him understand a difference between Jews and Christians in the sense that his Christian friends seem to feel that they have some sort of personal relationship with God, whereas none of his Jewish friends shared this feeling. And Plotz says this may be because, and I'll quote him here again, "A Christian armed with the rather gentle New Testament has a very agreeable God and Savior to spend time with. You wouldn't mind having Jesus micromanage your life. Jews face a more difficult proposition. Can you imagine the Old Testament God with all his caprice, vindictiveness, and violence acting directly in your life? I can't. It would be like wearing a Smite Me sign on my back." Now, as the subtitle of the book says, not only does Plotz discuss the bizarre, hilarious, and disturbing things in the Bible, he also writes about the marvelous and inspiring things there too. So in that respect, my review here is probably not doing his book justice, because I'm mainly focusing on his irreverent sections. Probably just those sections are my favorite, that's why. But the book does contain many passages of admiration for biblical passages that he finds compassionate or just beautiful. And I get the sense that he would prefer to find much more of these and much less of the bloodthirsty ones. Now, as an example of why I feel that Plotz would have preferred to found the Bible something that he could completely admire and even believe in, chapter 12 of his book talks about his trip to Israel, a trip that he made because he wanted to get closer to the Bible stories by being able to stand where the temple stood and to walk where King David walked. But he also combined this trip with some study of archaeology and history. And after trying to reconcile the Bible's stories with the facts of the world and realizing that these cannot be reconciled, Plotz writes, "Don't shout this into pews on Sunday, but when it comes to the fun parts of the Bible, from the Garden of Eden to Mount Sinai, the facts on the ground are scarce. Archaeologists have discovered no significant evidence for Noah's flood, for Sodom and Gomorrah, or for Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. They don't believe the Jews were enslaved in Egypt, wandered in the desert, or even conquered the Promised Land. Much evidence has survived about later books, such as the cut-rate monarchs and the latecomer generals in 1st and 2nd Kings. But the most celebrated biblical heroes remain stuck in the world of myth. The dividing line between myth and history is King David. Essentially nothing and no one until the time of King David can be confirmed. But much that comes after him can be. David himself is a gray zone." All right, Plotz also says that his reading of the Bible has forced him to reevaluate his own religious beliefs. And he even admits that he thinks it's terrifying to contemplate a world without God. But that it's more terrifying, or almost more terrifying, to think that the God of the Bible is really God. On page 95 of his book, he writes, "If this is God, well, God help us." Anyway, the fact that Plotz approaches the Bible with what's arguably desire to believe and disappointment that he can't, and that's, of course, interspersed with lots of good humor along the way, may, in the end, be a more effective means of skepticism than someone who just quotes the Bible only to attack it. All right. He ends his book in a non-confrontational way also. He says that reading the Bible has made him realize that the Bible's greatest heroes are not those that are the most faithful, but those who challenge God. And he writes, gives the examples of Moses negotiating with God at the burning bush, Gideon demanding divine proof before going to war, Job questioning God's own justice, Abraham demanding that God be merciful to the innocent of Sodom. And he says these people, they challenge God for his capriciousness and demand justice, order, and morality, even when God refuses to provide any of these. Reading the Bible has given me a chance to start an argument with God about the most important questions there are, an argument that can last a lifetime. Now, I have to admit I have mixed feelings about this end, especially the closing sentence. On the one hand, I like the way that it's not alienating to theists. But on the other hand, when he writes, reading the Bible has given me a chance to start an argument with God, I mean, that sounds like he's saying there really is a God who inspired the Bible, and maybe this God inspired certain passages that just make the Lord look like he's a whimsical tyrant, so that people can challenge those particular passages and learn to pick out the wise and compassionate sections and argue against the cruel ones. But I personally don't see that as a coherent explanation for why the Bible contains such a mix of sections that are, as he puts it, bizarre, hilarious, disturbing, and marvelous. Based on everything in Plotz's book except for his closing paragraph, I don't think Plotz himself interprets the Bible that way. And Plotz does give what I feel is a very coherent interpretation of why the Bible is so incoherent on page 26 of his book, where he discusses the perspectives of two biblical scholars whose names I might be mispronouncing here. James Kugel, author of How to Read the Bible, and Jacques Berlinblah, anyway, author of The Secular Bible. And the conclusion of these two scholars is that religious interpretations of the Bible rest on the mistaken premise that there's one mastermind behind the text, but that there's really nothing close to what we could call an author of the Bible. It's really a mix of a lot of separate stories by different authors, and that these stories are welded together in one collection. And this welding creates a lot of accidental juxtapositions. And people who believe the Bible is inspired by God can find meaning in those juxtapositions, but they're artificial meanings in the sense that they're unintentional. James Kugel calls the Bible junk sculpture, in the sense that the random stories are soldered together and they're turned into a new piece of art that seem to have meaning, deep meaning even, but as one coherent story. But we're just creatively imposing meaning on disjointed stories. Plotz writes that we can find meaning in the Bible, and I'll quote him again, only because humans have an extraordinary capacity for pattern recognition. We're very good at finding artificial order in chaos, but it's like seeing pictures in the clouds. So, good book. Highly recommended. And thanks for watching. So how about you? Have you seen